Thank you, Charles. And having recently been at the SJB 50-year anniversary, I've reflected that we're only 27 years in. I go, geez, it's a long, it's a long extra 23 years that you guys have achieved. So congratulations to you guys. Some serious stamina there. But thanks for the invite. And it was really interesting when you spoke about Tyson Street House. Really sort of made me pause and reflect on the value and the importance of images and image making in the production of architecture, but also the representation of architecture. And upstairs we've got a photography exhibition, but it made me realise how intrinsically linked documenting and representing our work is and communicating our work through photography. And I'm really thrilled that John Gollings is in the front room, because 3/4 of the images you're going to see on the screen tonight are his. And apologies for the ones that we didn't commission you to photograph John. But I also wanted to start with this image because I think in its best form, architectural photography transcends documenting a project, and it really communicates the true spirit and the true thinking and the true ideas of a project. And this is a photograph of the St Kilda Foreshore Promenade that we completed in 2009, and John was shooting it all day. And I went down at about 4:30 in the afternoon with my 2 daughters in the back of the car. I did not deliberately dress them in the same dress. I don't know how that happened. But as they arrived on the promenade, they just started running, and this undulating timber boardwalk just sent them wild. And they were running up and down, and John, of course, just started clicking his camera away. And this photograph, I think, captures the essence of that project, because it's about the beach, it's about summer, it's about pure joy, it's about whimsy, it's about delight. And the best photography does that, and the best photography captures everything that the project's about. So I wanted to start with this image. But onto our practice, a little bit about our backstory. We did start in 1999, and the projects were smaller. You were doing much bigger buildings than us in 1999, and it started with a project on a 69 square metre block of land in the laneway in West Melbourne. But we're now executing projects across a diverse range of typologies, and one example is the T3 commercial office building we finished in Wellington Street in Collingwood, which is 30,000 square metres and currently Australia's tallest completed mass timber office building. So it's been a real spectrum of work. And I suppose what's important to us as architects is to make our projects powerful and meaningful. And for us, it's really ensuring we're touching these 3 qualities on every single project. It's about poetics, pragmatics and place. The poetics, where's the joy, where's the elevated spirit, where's that moment to really turn an architecture into a meaningful experience? It's got to be coupled with pragmatics. It's got to work. It can't be frivolous. And we work our plans really hard, and we think about efficiencies, and we think about doing what we do but sparingly. And then, of course, it's about place, and how can a building sit within its context and engage with the context. And the context could be a social context, a cultural context. It could be pre-colonial times, it could be post-colonial times, and hopefully the best projects are doing all of that and engaging with place in a really meaningful way. So that's something we try and do and try and achieve in all projects, and I'll sort of thread that into some of the projects I'm going to talk about tonight. And I think when we follow that process, you can see really diverse and varied outcomes. I mean, the practice doesn't have a single hand. We really let the projects inform the outcome. And so by following these very sort of simple but rigorous principles of finding the joy, solving the problem intelligently, and making it meaningful to its context, we can produce really varied and exciting built form responses. And thinking about images and image making, I suppose it's always started in the creative process, and we use images and image making all the way through our creative process, from sketches to 3D renderings to diagrams to very technical drawings which communicate a building to a builder. So again, the use of images is integral to and it's the lifeblood of the practice in terms of how we think and how we perform our work. But what we've also realised, and certainly through the proliferation of social media, is that more often than not, buildings are actually experienced by people via images rather than they're actually physically encountered. And because of Instagram and because of the internet, we can really, I suppose, delightfully experience buildings from all over the world, not only local projects. And so that's where, I suppose, the idea and the communication of these projects and the skill and the success in the photography is so important, because the best photography will always really tell you about what is at the heart and the essence of a project. So onto a project which Charles introduced as a project which literally used as image as its starting point, as generator. And this is the Tyson Street house in Richmond. And as we can see, it's a single-storey street in Richmond with small weatherboard cottages and a heritage overlay. The building itself wasn't specifically listed, but the precinct was listed. But the cottage itself was really on its last legs. It was derelict, and I think the cost to actually rectify and repair was almost going to consume a huge amount of the budget. So, what to do when your client wants to do a 2-storey house with a roof terrace as well, and you're replacing a small weatherboard cottage? Well, the good news is it wasn't my problem to solve; it was my partner John Clemence's problem to solve, because this was his brother's house, and John's sitting in the back row. So correct me if I get any of the details wrong, Johnny. But garage, living space on the ground floor, bedrooms, and then a roof terrace, because any project in Richmond, according to John, needs a roof terrace to take advantage of the city views. So you can see the elevations and the scale of the building, and so the challenge here was, how do you make this fit into the street? And it was one of those sliding door moments where, in a meeting with council planners and heritage advisors, discussing the challenge of pulling this building down and replacing it with something appropriate, John referenced the recently completed Sam Newman house, the Pamela Anderson image in Canterbury Road, which was quite a fantastical and whimsical idea. But John said, well, why don't we actually take a photo of the house that was there and preserve it, and preserve the memory of this house, so it will live on, and its contribution to the street becomes a sort of a memory or an artefact, and it changes the relationship of the passerby with the building, and both the old building and the new one. So this was the photograph that was taken, and was taken at an accurate 1:1 scale, and that was then basically laid out over the glazed facade of the building. So everything about this is exactly at 1:1 scale, including the party wall line and the really crappy flashing detail of the adjoining property over here. And it folded around the side of the house and up a staircase as well. So that was applied onto the facade. And I think one of the best things here was desaturating the image. So it's clearly not trying to be that weatherboard house in the street, but it's this evocative memory of what was once there. And you can see the scale actually diminishes because of the approach. And so sitting and looking at the building in the street, and then transposing the new proposition in front of it. So this has actually been quite remarkable in its success. I think what's also interesting about it is, because it is a glazed facade, it then sometimes picks up reflections of buildings across the street, and so you get this really interesting blurring of images, and this sort of memory-like experience of the street continues. Late afternoon, the colours change, and then obviously into the evenings, and this again is one of John Gollings's really beautiful, powerful works, and I believe that's your son sitting on the front of the fence.
Sam.
Yeah, that was Sam. I think our kids are now that big, not that big. But again, the power of this image was really important to the practice. This became on the front cover of Blueprint magazine in the UK. It was such a beautiful and powerful image, and it really, I suppose, reinforced in our minds how important documenting your work and documenting your work in the right way was, so that it actually reached an audience far wider than those who could experience the project. So, thinking about how well-documented work communicates the idea of a project, we'll talk about another project we did early in that time, which was the treehouse in Wye River, Separation Creek. And this was the site that our clients bought, and that's Tim Jackson, my other partner, standing going, how the hell are we going to put a house over here? This was before Tim wandered into the bush and then slipped, and then slid about 15 metres down the hill. But it was, I think, quite interesting that he did slip, because as beautiful as this amazing site was in a little hamlet with fibro shacks, what our clients didn't realise is they'd bought a site which was in a landslip overlay. And to put anything on that site would have required the construction of a rock-anchored retaining wall that had to be penetrated 20 metres back into the bedrock, just after the Thredbo landslip that occurred in New South Wales. And so councils were terrified about this. So they did no due diligence and had to spend $140,000 on just securing their site. So the pragmatic then helped inform the architectural response. How do we keep the footprint of the building as tight as possible so that the wall doesn't, we reduce the length of the wall, make it short. And so noting that site, we thought, well, this has to be a tree house. So how do we think about a very, very small footprint for the base of the house and then cantilever the upper level rooms out like branches of a tree? So the building at once was sensible in terms of not incurring huge engineering costs, but also meaningfully connected to its site. So we did drawings, we built models, and then we inserted this building on the site. And the whole idea too was this was a subdivision off the edge of the village, and we didn't want this building to be a scar in the landscape. So we explored painting it 2 tones of green, and we were looking at Ellsworth Kelly paintings as well at the same time, and how this building could merge back in the landscape. So John's beautifully captured, I think, the spirit and the essence of the site, but no image does it better than this one, where you really feel the power and the spatial experience and the joy of the cantilevers. So this is a great exemplar of the image really telling the story of a project. Another early project where the image told the story, and a fairly simple, elegant contemporary townhouse in Richmond, a 2-storey townhouse, sat on top of a basement for a client of ours who were moving from the suburbs, and they wanted somewhere fun for their children to play. And so we created a basement like a swimming pool and lined it with blue AstroTurf so it felt like a swimming pool. And that image is fantastic, but John took the photo and then went away and did a bit of tinkering. And the next thing you know, that's what emerged. And I think it was such a brilliant move, because the rabbits instantly spoke of the play, the sense of joy, and the childlike activities that were going to happen in that space. And it wasn't the first time John had done this, and previously done amazing sequences of photos. And this is my partner Tim's family's property in Shoreham, where that's Tim jumping his show horse over a log, and John's superimposing images to again best articulate the essence and the spirit of a project. So I think thanks to your creative manipulations, John, we've got some great things. I actually do remember a university talk that when I was a student, you came and spoke, and Photoshop was just becoming a thing, and you showed us a Marlboro Man advert that you'd done, and you'd moved the moon. And as a year level, we were horrified. That was not a pure response, and we could not believe that you had done that. And here you go, you've gone and put rabbits in our basements. Playing with whimsy is a great thing in terms of post-production, but how might you bring that sense of whimsy into the generation of your built form response as well? And this is a recently completed project we did for the Victorian School Building Authority in Clifton Hill. And the site was a satellite site. The main campus was across the road. And how could we put a building, a vertical campus building on the site in a way that actually connected back to the heritage place that it once sat within? And you could see here there were some fairly nondescript 1970s blocks of flats on that site. But across the road, these really, really beautiful 1880s heritage school buildings. So how could we think about an architectural response that actually looked at and drew on the beautiful qualities of these buildings, and sort of try to bring that across the road in a more meaningful and contemporary way? And this is where this idea of place comes into our work. How do we embed our projects in a locale so that they become transformative but meaningful at the same time? This was also a really interesting project because not only was it a vertical school, but we'd managed to convince the VSBA to explore mass timber, low carbon mass timber construction, and also a passive house thermal envelope for the building, which means it's a very low energy consumption building. So it was really seen as a test case, and the government was rolling out a lot of school projects, and could we build better and save a lot of energy? And for example, the calculations on this project suggested that a power bill of $40,000 a year, if we were just doing it as a deemed to comply project, would reduce to about $4,000 a year because of the lack of the need of air conditioning, or the reduction in the need. So it was trying to do some pretty interesting things at the same time. But here we can start to see how the built form started to draw not only on the school building and the articulated brickwork and the multiple colours within the brickwork, but also on the terrace houses in the street adjacent to it. So we really wanted a building to be in and of that context. But we also wanted to be a building that would captivate the hearts and minds of kids. This is for years 5 and 6 children. And so we overlaid another narrative, and I think we all remember The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I mean, it's just such a fond book for everyone. And so this articulated brickwork actually became the wiggly worm of the hungry caterpillar wrapping its way around the facade and taking these giant bite-sized chunks out of the bottom of the building. And so whilst it might feel like a good and polite building for its neighbours, at the same time it's a beautifully playful and enjoyable building that relates to and resonates with the children who are using the building in a really wonderful way. And even the furriness of the caterpillar is articulated through these bricks, through the bricks that are sort of punched out on the upper levels of the building. You come inside and the green colour scheme continues through both the ground floor with an internal street and up onto a really beautiful and vibrant play-top area with maybe one of those chunks has actually landed on the bite-sized chunks has landed on the roof, and down into the classroom levels, which are really purposeful and pragmatic. They can be single classes or expanded into doubles, but most importantly they express the massed timber character of the structure. And that's another really important layer to this. I mean, we're trying to educate kids, we're trying to have them in calm, nurturing environments, and there's such beautiful biophilic qualities to timber and being in an environment that feels warm. And so we really sort of lent into and celebrated the feeling. And I know the parents of students who are at the school and the teachers themselves all love going there and living and working in this building because it feels so warm. We also thought it would be an opportunity to expose the services and let the building become an education piece for students as well, like how do things go together and how does a building function. But mostly, of course, they just want to play in the caterpillar bites as they sort of wait for their folks to pick them up at the end of the day. So that's a building that really connects to place, and I think, and there it is from the street as well. But onto another project which doesn't really play with image at all, but really tries to focus deeply on abstracting a sense of place and creating a meaningful reinterpretation of a place into an architecture and a built form. And this is Burn and Eat, a cultural and community centre that we completed on Phillip Island in Cowes. And this has been quite an amazing project for us. The existing property was a 1970s council building, a single-storey 1970s council building with pretty poor amenity and facilities for the occupants of the island. A lot of stakeholder engagement happened with council, and probably one of the most important things for everyone was please don't lose the trees, and there were some really beautiful mature gum trees on the site. So that almost became our starting point. And like all things, we started with scribbles, and you go to site and you have a sort of a feeling, and you pick up on some nuanced qualities, and so you're constantly testing and exploring. And these are just various sketches and scribbles that have occurred through the production of the project. But it's always something that's percolating in your mind, and something that keeps on finding itself onto a notebook when you're in a really boring meeting and not taking notes that you should be taking. But the ground floor footprint really did respect these trees. So there was an important stand of trees on the south western corner, and similarly on the eastern side, a really beautiful series of trees. And so the root protection zones almost defined the edges of the building. This is the main street, Thompson Avenue, the main street of Cowes. The building's also interesting because it can be approached from the main street, but also from a car park from the east. And so it's got sort of two entry points. So we used the trees on the eastern side to create a sort of a softer, quieter courtyard, and a more public and civic space on the western side, and a sort of a narrow throat that you arrive from. What's interesting in this building is this layered quantum of programs that we were having to accommodate. It included a 250-seat theatre, an art gallery, a series of community rooms that could be either one large space or three smaller spaces, and then onto a library, a historical museum, and up on the upper level of here, council offices as well. So really a transformative project for the island in the context of how many, I suppose, cultural services they were trying to co-locate. And I think what became interesting in this project too, if you follow that principle of pragmatics leading the way, when we laid the program out on site, a theatre is a 12 metre high box. you've got community rooms which need volume, and then you've got double height spaces on the northern side. And so we let this sort of the assemblage of the different parts of program and their different volumes help inform the shape and the form of the building. And it could have been a series of articulated boxes, 1, 2, 3, with a glazed link. But as we developed the project, we started to think, hang on, this might actually start to help us explore a more topographic response and more about how the building relates to the topography and the geology of the island in a minute. Sustainability, we were doing both this project and Clifton Hill at the same time, and sustainability was really front and centre from council's perspective. They wanted to be seen to be leading the way. And so again, mass timber was something that we were able to pursue within the project. Zero carbon bricks, solar shading of the windows, again a passive house envelope, as much solar collection as possible and rainwater collection. But the passive house modelling was fascinating, and I can't see the data from here, but I think if we built a conventional building, we went from about 26 kilowatt hours per metre squared of heating load to about 14.2 or 34.2 or something like that. So a massive reduction in the energy and running costs. And a passive house insulated environment is a really comfortable environment to be in. It doesn't use air conditioning. It draws in fresh air, and that's filtered air in a very beautifully insulated and tempered environment. So this was going to be a first, and this is the first certified passive house theatre and community building in Australia. When you finish the project, you have to get a giant reverse vacuum cleaner and blower and blow the whole building full of air to test for any leaks, and you can only have a really minuscule amount of leaking, which really talks to, I suppose, how well insulated it is. So the process is complicated, and you're almost wrapping parts of the building like a fridge. There was heavy insulation on the ground and a lot of really complex detailing, looking at thermal transfer, heat transfer from outside to inside, and how we had to import special rubber heat transfer minimisers from Germany, that the only ones available that could be certified for passive house at this time. And a series of construction photos, because it was a really interesting and complex site, laying down the slab and the thermal insulating layers, starting to put the cross-laminated timber walls in place, then the mass timber columns through the main spine of the building, the grand hall, and then onto a series of structural steel frames for the roof space. So a very complex three-dimensional jigsaw, which was also being delivered while we were all in COVID lockdown. So you can imagine how complex those design sessions were, and the online Zoom meetings with the builders. But we got there, and I think another thing that was really amazing about this project was its ability to source local materials wherever possible. And so whilst it's on Phillip Island, we were able to get the timber from Gippsland, the mass timber columns, the CLT from Albury-Wodonga. Up until that time, most of the CLT panels came from Europe, and so being able to have it all locally sourced was fantastic. So a lot of pride, certainly from the council and the councils as well, in their endeavours to produce a building that was as local as possible. But we had to sort of create a narrative for the building, and it came about through understanding the island and looking at the geology of the island and the underlying geologies, and the pink granite on the pinnacles on the southeastern tip, and also the ecologies and the topography of the island. So we were always thinking to ourselves, how could this building feel as if it emerged out of the essence of the island? And interestingly enough, in a strange kind of way, the plan of the island and the plan of the building almost sort of reflected each other completely, unexpectedly, with these sweeping bays and gentle arcs. So it sort of started telling its own story to us. But we scoured a whole bunch of images, and we're really looking at the island, and these are the pinnacles at the eastern side with this beautiful pink granite. You could see the sweeping bays and the sort of the gentle undulating topography. Timber remnants like the jetty at Cowes, the beaches, and then also thinking about the dunes and the gentle erosion that happens on the dunes. And so trying to pull this into an architectural response was something that we worked at really hard. And I think we've sort of achieved something where the building, as you can see in this instance here, sits here with this beautiful soft coloured brickwork, which is referencing the beaches of the island. But you can see how we've started to project the bricks out of the facade, so it's gently starting to look like it's peeling away and eroding. And as we move around, little ambient glimpses of areas where you could see in, and using the sun shading as a reflection of the theatre curtain, which is the activity starting to communicate the activities happening inside. and in walking along Cowes Main Street, looking at this very simple, gently undulating topography for the building. And I think one of the interesting things about layering these sorts of references or metaphors into a building is you never know what people are going to take from it. And whilst we saw the, I can't go backwards. I will go backwards. While we saw the bricks as being sort of reflective of the gentle erosion, I think a local writer really references more like taking a walk on the beach and the way your footsteps sort of impress into the sand and then gently start to fade away as the tide comes in. So it's quite beautiful how different people bring their own meaning and reading to the project. Here's the eastern courtyard, and again you can see these beautiful trees that we're able to preserve, and instantly they gave a sense of scale and completedness to the site, which is really quite wonderful. And then coming inside, and I mentioned these mass timber columns, and this is the main spine that links all the functions in the plan. It's the grand hall, and we get up to about 12 metres tall where we're near the theatre, and then staircases going upstairs, and then that spine links around the courtyard and opens into what are the library spaces within the building as well. And it's just got an amazing ambience. You walk into this building and you feel instantly soft and instantly calm, and it's an amazing intangible. And again, it goes to reinforcing the sense of biophilic qualities that the beautiful soft natural materials can generate within a building. An example of the community rooms, and again, this is all of the rooms opened up together, but then a smaller room closed off, and this idea of referencing the island continued through the generation of these spaces. And these are chicory kilns, which you could still find dotted through the islands, and this was the primary agricultural production of the island about 100 plus years ago. And so again, people can walk in here and see and understand these references. And I mean, I should talk to that too. I mean, you could start to see the remnants of the Cowes jetty as well. There's also beautiful soft spaces and quiet spaces, and even taking this very beautiful soft palette into the toilet, so that pink granite is still resonating all the way through the building. And then you get into the gallery space, and this is an exhibition by a local artist, Eileen Taylor, who was using local grasses and local vegetation that she dried and threaded together in these beautiful sculptural installations. So it's a gallery that's really starting to, I suppose, nurture and curate local talent and building a name for itself. But I suppose the main game is also the theatre space, and this has been transformative culturally for the island as well. We had a launch, and at the launch they had Kate Sobrano, Slava Gregorian, Kutcher Edwards, an Indigenous artist, and the Victorian Ballet all performing, and they council put together a beautifully curated program, which was all of a sudden this fantastic extension to things that you can do on the island. And Phillip Island is generally known for penguins, and it's known for motor racing, although no more, unfortunately. So being able to actually be a cultural drawcard as well is really important, and council uses that theatre as a cinema on a Sunday morning, so people have come and stayed in Airbnbs and have to check out by 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. There's a 12 o'clock movie on there, and it helps stretch the visitation and people using cafes in Cowes. So it really has been an amazingly regenerative project. But beyond internationals and national stars, it's also about the local community and school groups and school theatre productions and local art societies all using the space. And when the local art society had their exhibition here, I think all the artists found that they sold far more artwork than they'd actually sold previously in the other gallery spaces that they were in. So it certainly seems to be, quite amazingly embraced by the community. And I think, just reflecting on those timber columns and the biophilic qualities of the building, I sat next to a lady at the opening in the theatre, and she leaned across and she said, I absolutely love those timber columns. In fact, I went and gave one a hug before I came in here. She said it was a lot nicer than hugging my husband. So that was quite amazing. And the other layer that was quite remarkable too was talking to Kutcher Edwards, because we did engage with Indigenous owners and Indigenous custodians as part of the journey. And Kutcher said to me after the performance, he said, I feel like this building is alive with the spirit of my ancestors. And that was an amazingly powerful conversation that I had with him, where we weren't trying too hard, we weren't trying to be overt about our referencing, but it's a building that connected and resonated on many levels. So, building we're incredibly proud of and is doing really great things for the island. That's also then led to other really interesting things, and we're also looking forwards as well as backwards, and we've got a project on the books right now, is a renovation of the Bendigo Art Gallery, which is a really fantastically exciting project, and this has included a lot of engagement with the Dja the traditional owners, and we've looked at their motifs on their shields and the sort of tashelite stones that they used as tools, and the white clay of the area, and thinking how that might influence the design and the articulation of the building, which is still really a sealed box as a gallery. But there's an opportunity for an artwork on the front facade, and this was a placeholder where we put a chevron pattern referencing their shields, but we're now working with a local artist, a local Indigenous artist, who's doing special weavings for that front facade patterning. So that's coming. And then coming inside, keeping that white Bendigo clay colour scheme throughout, and looking at faceting all of our junctions like the way the tools all worked, and coming into the front gallery, which is an Indigenous gallery for the Dja and it also houses a place of keeping where sacred artefacts are being repatriated as well. So it's an incredibly exciting project, and one that is just starting on site right now. So we're just starting to see the first of the artist moulds, and it's looking really, really thrilling. Speaking of artists, we've sort of done quite a bit with artists over the years as well, and so collaborating with image makers has been a really exciting thing. And I think just that point of collaboration is something I just wanted to make. It's so integral to the way we work as a practice. There's three of us as partners. We sit next to each other. We're having lunch 3-4 days a week together. We're talking all the time. We're collaborating with our staff. We collaborate with landscapers, other architects, and artists have found their way into this collaborative mix as well. And so really expanding how we think about architecture through image. And the first project is a collaboration with Ian Strange. And it's a project that John Clements did when he walked out his front fence and the house across the road was up for sale. So John was living on the western side of Clifton Street, and Maria, who'd lived there for 40 years, unfortunately passed away, and her family put the property up for auction. And John absolutely loved the property and bought it, managed to buy it. And I think he reached out to Ian and thought, how can we actually do something here to help sort of transition this house into this new site and remember the life and the energy that was on the site. And a lot of Ian's work was about looking at houses that had been abandoned and houses that were going to be demolished, and how you sort of represent the memories or the lack of or the absence of memory in these spaces. So Ian has been doing really interesting work, and as a practice we were really captivated by his work. So John reached out to Ian, and John and Ian put on an exhibition. So for 3 days in October, Ian did an artwork on the face of the house, a sort of red target. It's a bullseye. This is going to go. And he had an exhibition on the inside. And I think over 3 days, over 2,200 people came through the house. And internally were other exhibitions of Ian's work. And here's Ian and John looking 10 years younger. And I would say hairier, John, but that you had no hair back then as well. But it was just an amazing experience and such a fantastic collaboration, and that then the house was eventually demolished, and Ian made this artwork, which was his artwork, I suppose commemorating and memorialising the house. And that little 1970s brick house has now become a contemporary terrace that John's put on the site for his family. And I think what's interesting about this house is it's trying to reference, the colonial qualities of the site, the immigrant influences in terms of the Greek and Italian migrants through Richmond, the lemon trees, the fruit trees, Indigenous landscape, a little seat at the front fence if you're waiting for an Uber, or just inviting anyone to pause and stop and have a yarn. And so it's a beautiful house, and as you come through the front door, there's Ian's artwork, which then leads through into the main spaces. And then the main spaces bleed out onto this really beautiful courtyard space, which over time has grown up absolutely beautifully. And again, it's all native and indigenous plants, and so it's a building that really talks to migrants, terrace houses from colonial times, and indigenous ecology and landscape as well. And so a really meaningful and beautiful house to be in. And John's done an amazing job there. Ian's not the only artist we've collaborated with. We've also collaborated with Matthew Johnson, an abstract painter and a colourist, and it started in a job project in the early 2000s, where we were doing a 5-storey apartment building in Richmond, and this is one of the tallest buildings in Richmond in an industrial precinct, and across the road were single-storey houses. And we decided, how do you disguise 5 stories of scale in the facade? And well, you create a really abstract facade. And you go to your friend Matthew and get him to start thinking about the composition of the dots. And those dots actually permeated through all levels of the plan. So an owner who was 10 dwellings in, we painted a blue, one of these circles, but in a gloss paint versus a matte paint. So you still had this artwork sort of embossing its way all the way through the property. So that was an early project, and was really about playing with scale, or descaling a building, and also almost creating an abstract art piece in its own right onto the street. But other work with Matthew included a recent project, which is really the wrapping of the car parks at Chatston Shopping Centre. And it's an artwork that Matthew devised and worked with us, where it was really about playing with the idea of the folds and the billowing of fabric, and putting a series of vertical aluminium fins onto the car park, which is really so publicly experienced in the corner of Dandenong Road, and creating a purposeful address for cars. And you can see from these images how it picks up the light in different times of the day, and just it really seems to have this beautiful undulating and shimmering quality to it. So a very, very simple technique, but something that's really beautiful and expressive in the way it's experienced. But that kind of that didn't lead to, but probably the most significant project we've done with Matthew is the famous or infamous Lego building at St Kilda Junction. And I think if you took a poll, and I'd be interested even in this room, probably 50% of Melburnians love this building and 50% of Melburnians hate this building. And I know that for a fact because a friend of mine was Uber driving for a while, and he said, I've got he's literally keeping a ledger, and it is 50-50 as people drive past this building. And he said they either go, we absolutely love that, or who the hell put that there? So, but I think why this project is the way it is again thinking about place and purpose. St Kilda Junction, this is the gateway to St Kilda. And St Kilda has always been Melbourne's pleasure playground suburb. And we looked at St Kilda Road and St Kilda Junction. There were a lot of very dull, flat buildings, and we thought, how do you sort of mark a gateway and a landmark site and make this really purposeful and energetic and sort of an exciting signifier of the suburb you're about to enter. But it wasn't just about sculptural folly. It was also about ensuring that we weren't overshadowing the property immediately to the east. And so all these various boxes were stacked and slightly shuffled around to ensure that we weren't overshadowing the neighbours. And we thought of stacking these boxes and colouring them in different colours. So we started to infiltrate a sense of community into the building. I live in the green box or the yellow box or the white box. So breaking down the scale of what was, could have been just a fairly boring extruded tower, and making this joyful and meaningful. And that's where we started chatting with Matthew. And I think the thinking and the conversation with Matthew is, how do you draw on the ambience of St Kilda Road and the beautiful colours of St Kilda Road, that boulevard as you drive down towards the site, the changing colours of the leaves, and also picking up on the joy and the exuberance within St Kilda. So Matthew did these beautiful paintings, and you could see some of his dot paintings that he sort of referenced, and then starting to play with various colour palettes and thinking about this beautiful transition as the building slowly dissolves up into the sky. And I think the top colours are really reminiscent of clouds, and clouds in a sunset. So, this was a really fantastic process working with Matthew on this, and it translated into the marketing images, and that's another really important use of imaging and image making in the production of architecture. It's how important images are in communicating an idea to an audience who might be a purchasing audience. And so that was the marketing render, and then this is the completed project as captured by John and his trusty wide-angle lens. And I think what's been interesting about this too is that it has really captivated people, and so much so local artists are doing their own versions of the building. And we recently had another publisher reach out to us, and she's doing sketches of Port Phillip structures, meaningful Port Phillip structures. So the building's now living on in a whole other series of impressions and images. So it's a really exciting and fascinating thing to see this evolve in this next layer of representation coming out of the building. But it does lead me to my concluding project, which is apt that we're staying in St Kilda. And we've had a long history in terms of working on St Kilda, and I mentioned the promenade. And this is that sort of mounded structure that early photo that John took. My daughters were running around with so whimsically, and we did the St Kilda promenade in 2007, 700 metres of promenade from Brooks Jetty in the south up to the pier. And that was an amazing project to be involved with, but it also then opened up a conversation with Parks Victoria about a master plan for St Kilda Harbour. And the pier itself was really on its last legs. It had reached its end of year life cycle. They were spending $1 million to $2 million a year in renovating it. There'd also been a really terrible storm in the mid-2000s, which had damaged a lot of the boats in the harbour. And so there were maritime engineers involved who were putting all sorts of really aggressive wave wall structures in front of the pier to try and protect the harbour. So thankfully Parks Victoria got us involved, ourselves and site office, our long-term landscape collaborators, to start thinking, how do we stop two giant engineering concrete walls out in the bay from being the way that we were going to forever and a day experience in Kilda. And the design work we did integrated the concrete wave wall into our new pier. And by integrating into the pier, it created a sea bath. And so the wave wall was under this edge. And then drawing on the history and tradition of sea baths within St Kilda, we thought, can you put a pool inside the pier? And this was such an important image because this is really an example of an image as a catalyst or a motivator. And this image instantly captured everyone's attention. And it's stuck with people, and that's the most beautiful thing. I mean, this has been a long arc, this project. We started in this master plan in 2007, and people continuously talked about this and the potential of something like this, this integrated sea bath into the pier. But what happened? So here was our plan with the sea bath, with the integrated wave wall, a really beautiful, elegant proposal, but then the government had no funds, and the RMYS were getting really upset about potential damage to their boats. So there was funding for $1 million and an extension of the breakwater, the rock breakwater around St Kilda Marina was put in this location. And not quite as elegant as our sea bath, but the good news is this was done in 2013. They consulted with us, and we realigned some of our diagrams, and we put piles and pier sleeves in the breakwater, so that at a future point in time we could still put this idea into the new pier. So that was good. Eventually, in 2018, the government, Parks Vic, thought they had a strong financial paper and a financial argument to put this up for funding, but they were way too scared about the idea of either a pier with a sea bath in it or a pier that may not be straight. So our amended version of the design was actually crank the pier and land the pier on the breakwater, so that you actually didn't experience this breakwater anymore and the pier sort of hit it. But they insisted that we went out to the community with a straight pier with this kind of strangely buried little sea bath in it as well. But the good news is that that image resonated, and people, local community, spoke really long and loudly about the benefit of this as a new idea. And so eventually funding came through, and in 2020 we started work on the design of the pier, just as COVID hit. And again, when you're trying to design with people, including maritime engineers and landscape architects and 3 or 4 people from your office in the office on a piece of paper, that's one thing. Trying to do it online when someone drops out of a Teams call and then their screen freezes. I mean, design meetings went on for 3 or 4 hours, but I think there was an amazing commitment to the project and the opportunity of the project. So that was the completed. There is the completed project, and I suppose in part of the execution of the project, we went backwards and we looked at historical photos, and some of the earliest photographs of the pier show had actually came all the way out to Jacker Boulevard, and here were the old St Kilda sea bars over here. And what was also interesting was the quantum of timber on the pier too. So we constantly used this reference image in our presentations to Park Victoria and various other people around how important, extending the pier was all the way back to Jacker Boulevard, and B, getting as much timber on the pier as possible as opposed to concrete. But funding cut itself off at the edge of the seawall. So Pier Road was still arcing around here, and the really awful entry into the car park, Seabelt's car park, was here. But we kept at it, and we created an image like this, which showed Parks Victoria and City of Port Phillip and the government the value and the benefit of extending this as a major urban design link back to Jacker Boulevard. And again, this is where images and image making has been so powerful in helping convince and communicate an idea and the importance of an idea. And it was pretty self-evident when we transitioned from that to that, how important this would be. But this was no mean feat, because it required a shift in jurisdiction, and the land from the seawall onward the project from the seawall onwards is Parks Vic, and from the land side it's City of Port Phillip. So these works have lagged behind, but they are almost finished now, and that's going to be absolutely fantastic when the pier effectively goes back and finds its old historical home at the edge of Jacker Boulevard. So what did we do? We took a straight pier, we bent it to land on the breakwater extension to create a civic forecourt, and this became our amended version of that sea bath. We looked at all the diverse activities: foreshore arrival, pier entry, boat landings, promenading, fishing, terracing, and then the penguins. So the other amazing thing about this site is that there's a fantastic penguin colony, and penguins were being unfortunately harmed because of lack of control of visitation, and so Parks Vic and also the Penguin Parade got involved in, and Earthcare were involved in thinking about how we can better access and controlled access to the penguins. So the project continued on into a penguin viewing boardwalk. The other thing to think about, though, is climate change and sea level rise and the prevailing conditions. So this breakwater was really important, but modelling proved up that it wasn't sufficient, and we needed to ensure that we wouldn't get overtopping, sweeping people off the pier in the case of a storm event. So there was desktop modelling looking at sea level rise and actual physical modelling as well. So a fascinating process to be involved in, and outside of our usual architectural remit, but really wonderful seeing these videos of the wave testing, which all found its way into the final project. And so we're going to take a wander along the pier, starting at pier entry, where what we've done is continued a remnant of the original pier orientation, and this is the original 1850s pier alignment. When a pier is being built, you maintain an old pier, build a new pier next to it, demolish the old pier. Then you build a new pier and demolish the old pier. So the alignment has always changed, but this is the original 1850s alignment, and this has become a lower level boat landing for water taxis, fishing charters, etc. You can see the main pier section and then the lower boat landing section. We then come across to where we've landed on the breakwater, and the breakwater is where we expand into all these beautiful new seating terraces, which is the evolution of the idea of our sea bath. And this is a really complex bit of engineering, which includes both an upper promenade plus all these stepped platforms. It's a bit like constructing a sort of a football stadium seating arrangement. And then we had to deal with this wave wall. And so we had to have an upstand over here to deal with waves that got over the breakwater that would be stopped and broken by this upstand. And so we had an outer edge we wanted fishermen and people to experience the edge of the pier, and that's a porous FRP mesh, so waves can hit this and punch up through it in a storm to take some of the wave energy out of the pier. And then finally onto the beautiful, whimsical penguin viewing platforms, which we've pulled off the breakwater. I think there's about 117 or 121 penguins recorded in the breakwater. And previously, the walkways were right adjacent to the breakwaters, so we've pulled it off. We've given sort of safe space for the penguins and really ample viewing platforms as well. And then it's about St Kilda and St Kilda-ness, and all of our work at St Kilda started with this idea of St Kilda-ness. And when we started the promenade many years ago, Council had done work around capturing the essence of St Kilda-ness, and it's joy, it's whimsy, it's Luna Park, it's delight, it's the kiosk. So how could we pick up on these familiar motives in a new toilet and storage area for the kiosk, thinking about the plats? This is the elevated wave wall becoming a seat as well, and then repurposed bits of timber from in front of the old St Kilda Pier kiosk to create our seats for the projects, the history and mystique and aura all folding into one experience. And I mentioned building a pier. Here's a really fascinating shot. They retained the old pier, built the new pier, and then slowly demolished the old pier, and all had to be built in sections. It was built from the land out and from the breakwater out. Quite an amazing sort of feat of construction and engineering. The best thing about this project is that our builders became so passionate about it. Simpson's engineers, they saw what an amazing landmark project this was for Melbourne and Australia, and really poured their heart and soul into it. And I think the quality of the outcome is in part due to a fantastic team effort. But onto a little wander down the pier, and I think what's so beautiful about it, it just takes on board all these different flavours and experiences subject to the weather conditions, the time of day. This is first thing in the morning with that morning sunrise just hitting the pier, and then coming through to late afternoon, and you can start to see the popularity of our terraces. And they're so beautiful because they pick up these amazing views of the city, but they also provide an opportunity to get out of the wind. The other beautiful thing about the wave wall is it blocks the southwesterly wind, so you could sit here on a fairly cool day and sit in the northern sun and feel very comfortable. Part of our thinking here was this is an opportunity for St Kilda Festival to have a floating bandstand and a band over here, or even sort of a moonlight cinema with an inflatable screen. So many amazing ways to use this harbour, and I think the sky's the limit in terms of the opportunity. But it's really been embraced, and it's been embraced by a certain generation. And I think what's been fascinating about this project is it's become the public space that Melbourne didn't know it needed. We don't really have that waterside experience, and here we have this amazing opportunity to hang out with our friends, jump in the water, socialise, go and get an ice cream at the kiosk, and it's really taken on board a life of its own, and it just produces some beautiful and amazing images, and it's really a fantastically energised space leading through onto the penguin boardwalks and the viewing experience. And then hovering above it and seeing, you could start to see that landside work continuing on towards Jacker Boulevard. The fragment of the original alignment, which is the lower boat landing, the changed geometry of the breakwater to protect the boat landing, and then the pier arcing itself about and connecting into the marina itself. And I think, subtle details and subtle ideas, the idea of the balustrade being bent as if it's been sort of leaning over in the prevailing wind. So over time, the wind has just gently impacted on the pier. And then recognising that this is a joyous place at night and in the evening as well as during the day. And you could see all these strands of circulation and the fine mesh when we're on the other side of the wave wall. And celebrating fishing and the fishermen, and the fact that the balustrade then leans over as like you're on the bow of a ship and you're really on that water's edge experience. And then coming through to the pavilion where you might collect before going into a penguin visit, and then the penguin visitation itself. And you could see a fragment of the old jetties where people were walking right alongside the edge of the piers, so the edge of the breakwater. So really keeping this safe and great viewing opportunities. And zooming back out at night, it feels like a strange sea creature but really quite beautiful seeing how the pier comes and arcs around, creating our terraces, and then, like a sort of an anemone wanders through into the penguin viewing platforms. But what's been so dissatisfying is watching how once you complete a project, it then gets embraced by the wider public, and everyone then starts to make their own images of their experiences on the pier. And this is amazing, just trawling through Instagram and just seeing how people are capturing their moments and their journeys along the pier. And so these public projects take on board a life of their own, and going down there and being anonymous and seeing people fishing and swimming and enjoying it, and none of them really knowing the hours of work and the deep thinking that's gone into facilitating those spaces. But one of my favourite images of the pier was taken by a photographer we collaborated with, Tom Hunt-Smith. He tends to be more of a fashion photographer, but every now and then he does architectural photography. And he was down there one day, and I just got these random text messages from him as he was taking photos. And to me, this was evocative of those amazing Rennie Ellis photos of St Kilda in the 80s, and just the joy and the spirit and the whimsy and the aliveness of the place was just so fantastic. So certainly a project that we're thrilled to have been able to deliver for Melbourne, and one that we're incredibly proud of. So I will finish over there.